So it's been about a week now since we had that jam-packed March 8th event. I feel like our temperatures have cooled. We've gotten to digest more of the info. Some embargoes have dropped, and we now have some new info on some new Apple products. And also, there is more and more conflicting Apple rumors that just dropped last week and this week. And I don't remember a time that leakers have been so in conflict than they are right now. So we'll get to all of that in this episode. A lot to get into. But first, of course, we want to hear from you guys. If you guys have a question, a comment, some feedback, you want some buying advice, you want some advice on your tech purchase, or you just have a comment on Apple, let us know. You can comment at our Apple Circle hotline. You can text that number or call it. It's 949-354-3508. You can leave a comment on our YouTube channel. We're the Apple Circle Podcast. You can tweet us. That's a lot of ways to get in touch with us and give us your question or comment. Matt, how you doing this week? Pretty good week, right? Anything special going on your end?
Just patiently
I don't know where I'm going.
Just patiently waiting for the Mac Studio and the Studio Display to get in. As we're recording this, we have not had the embargoes on those particular products drop. We're expecting that probably tomorrow, which would be Thursday. I mean, if it's not tomorrow, then Friday is when it comes out, so it's got to be tomorrow, right? It's possible they don't do embargoes for those products, even though it seems kind of weird, but they have done that before, right?
I will say, poor MKBHD, he had two big leaks caught by Twitter this week. One was that in his iPhone SE video he released on Monday, there was a shot with the display and the Mac Studio in the background, which I think technically, that's breaking embargo because you're not supposed to show it off, but he can do what he wants.
I totally missed
and also
that.
someone screen grabbed that from his, I think, was it his iPhone SE video or his iPad Air embargo video that screenshot of his calendar, and it showed that the embargo for Mac Studio is in fact tomorrow. So as we record this, Thursday, going to be the 17th at 9 a.m., we will get all the goodness on Mac Studio. Obviously, by the time you guys are watching this episode, it's happy launch day. They're out now, Studio Display and Mac Studio. But I guess, Matt, we got some info on iPhone SE, on iPad Air. Anything kind of stood out to you? I mean, it's basically status quo. iPhone SE, it's fine for the price. iPad Air, same thing. It's got the M1 inside. Honestly, I hate to admit this, but I really didn't watch any coverage on the iPad Air. I watched like 2 videos on the iPhone SE just to see what people said. I watched a little bit of Marquez's video on the iPad Air, but it's so self-explanatory that it kind of goes without saying, this is it, M1, there you go. Most of the stuff I saw was kind of what we discussed. It was all about iPad Air versus iPad Pro and what you should get and, who's for what. But did you see any embargoed content that piqued your interest?
Oh, I wouldn't say that piqued my interest necessarily, but I did watch a few and, see what people had to say. And again, it's not surprising. The iPhone SE 3 is really not surprising because there's nothing to it. But the iPad Air, even though everything was what we were expecting, like there's no surprises now that people have them in their hands. There's no surprises with the iPad Air. But at least, we've been kind of complaining about the iPad Air from the iPad Pro perspective. But if you're in the iPad Air perspective, this is a great product. Like, this is an excellent update. Like, you're really getting your money's worth here. And that kind of was solidified with, everyone actually using them now. That seems to be the consensus, is that the 11-inch iPad Pro really, unless you're like one of those features that the Pro has that you really need, the iPad Air is the way to go. And I think Marquez's video really said it best, which was, I guess he mentioned in his video that the 120 hertz is like a killer feature for him. It's a 100% a reason to spend the extra money. And, for the average everyday person, I don't think that's necessarily the case. But if you have that one feature, then the Pro is still worth it. Other than that, the Air is the way to go. And no real surprises there. Although I will say that blue color is kind of nice. It's a lot more vibrant than I was expecting it to be. Like, in the renders, it seemed kind of similar to last year's, but the colors seem nice.
Because I also forgot too, we saw embargoed videos drop on the green iPhone 13 Pro, which I love the color, but I am not one that will splurge on a mid-cycle refresh when the new iPhone 14 is coming.
No,
so I have a case on this anyways. Like, and also, in all honesty, let me take this case off. The Sierra Blue, I'm not a fan of it. It's fine. It's not the best iPhone color ever. The reason I always get this is because I want the unique color so you can differentiate the newer one from the older one on video, especially since the 13 Pro is very similar to the 12 Pro. But I don't know. The green looks nice. I would definitely have gotten green if that's what it was when it launched. But, mid-cycle refresh, I'm not gonna, some people will go out and, more power to you if you want to go out and buy a whole new iPhone. But I will stick with my my old and dusty 13 Pro until the 14 Pro
I know.
Emerges.
How will we
and
survive?
I guess speaking of that, a little bit of iPhone 14 news. Interesting stuff. So, a couple of things here to talk about. One is that we heard for the first time that I can ever remember, this is coming from Ming Chi Kuo and 9to5Mac, so two credible sources, that Apple is going to split their processors this year, giving the A16 Bionic to the 14 Pro and the 14 Pro Max, but doing, or I guess rather keeping the A15 Bionic in the 14 and 14 Mac. So if you go with the Pro higher end iPhone, you're going to get the newer chip. If you go with the lower end iPhone, you're going to get the, well, quote unquote older chip. It's still a fantastic chip. I really don't think this is a huge deal. Matt, when you heard about this, did you have opinions one way or the other, or is this just sort of, is it Apple deliberately making a move to say, you know what, we don't really need to put all these fancy schmancy chips in every phone, let's just do it this way? Or is this Apple being like, look, we're having supply chain issues, constraints, let's save our better chips for the higher end phones, and we've got a bunch of these A15s, let's not put them in the iPad Air and save them for the 14 and 14 Max?
I think it's a combination of all those things. Well, I mean, if you look at the iPhone 13 right now, they actually kind of already do a split. So the A15 and the regular iPhone has, of course, off the top of my head, I'm not going to remember, but the GPU cores is not quite as high.
An extra core or something?
I believe it's an extra core. Yeah, that the Pro has an extra core over the regular 13. So it's still an A15. It's just a little overclocked, or I guess they probably underclocked the iPhone 13. It's probably the same exact chip. They just turn off one of those cores. That'd be my guess. So yeah, I mean, there already is that split. Is it noticeable at all? I highly doubt it. Like no one's ever mentioned it. So except for when they announced it on stage, like no one ever talks about it. So obviously the difference is not that big. I guess what's interesting is that presumably the iPhone 14 will be somewhat different than the iPhone 13, so it keeps the same processor, which is kind of weird. I could see them maybe unlocking that core, kind of like what they did with the A12X to the A12Z. It's the same exact chip, but they just added the other core that was already there. So I could see that happening. So it is still kind of different, and they can like brag about like, oh, it's still a little faster, maybe. I guess this is kind of making me think, though, is, all the rumors we've heard for the iPhone 14 have been for the iPhone 14 Pro. So is it possible that the iPhone 14, the regular one, the not the Pro version, is it possible that does not get a redesign at all, and the Pro is the only one that they focus on? Is that possible? Have we heard anything about that?
Well, I guess to follow up with that, there is some bad news on that front. That at least according to one Cad Render Leak or Cad file leak, that the iPhone 14 Pro's design actually might not be as substantial as we thought. So I think this is from, 95 Mobiles?
91 Mobiles.
91 Mobiles. This leaked today. Mac Rumors had an article on it. And I don't know the track record of this particular source. I heard it's a little sketchy. I saw some criticism on it. But take it with a grain of salt. But what they leaked was a design that was kind of different, but not all that different. So you have the pill hole punch, double hole punch there at the replaces the notch on the 14 Pro and Pro Max, but the camera bump is there. And also, what's most noticeable is that we had heard that it was going to have an iPhone 4 style design with round volume buttons. The volume buttons that are in this leaked CAD file are like the regular square rectangular buttons that are not circular. So maybe the design we saw or reported on was a little too ambitious all along, and maybe it's not so much that the 14 and 14 Max are not going to get a huge design change. It's that all the 14s won't actually get a huge design change.
Right.
And I guess if you think about it, maybe the big design change is just the removal of the notch for the double hole punch, which would be disappointing, but I can't really say that'd be surprising at all, knowing Apple.
Yeah, no, that would not be surprising at all. I mean, honestly, they did, since the iPhone 10, they've had this 3-year cycle, so now they would be going back to a 2-year cycle, so it's kind of confusing. No reason why they wouldn't keep that 3-year cycle now that they're in this, I guess, post iPhone 10 world. But yeah, that's interesting. I guess there's a few ways you could go about this. Like, on one hand, John Prosser released these original leaks and renders that we're all basing everything on. He released that back in 2021,
before the launch of the 13. So we're talking last September.
So even though his source, well, there's a few ways you could go about that. Like, Apple could have intended that to be the iPhone 14, but now in the world of today with all these supply chain issues, I mean, Foxconn, where they make the iPhones, was shut down because of a COVID outbreak. So that alone, like those kind of things are just making massive issues for Apple. So they could just say, you know what, we were trying to do something ambitious, but the world is too crazy right now. We want to play it safe. Let's just release what we can, and we'll catch up as things kind of normalize. That's one way to go about it. The other way is that they are working on this phone, but it was not supposed to be the iPhone 14. It's the iPhone 15, and whoever his source was just maybe didn't know or got it wrong or deliberately told him something different. Or the other way is that this is just completely not something that was ever happening. Or I guess the last one, as we've seen with a lot of these leaks lately, or sorry, not the leaks, the leaks, but also at the events, they could all be completely wrong, and we do actually see this complete redesign with no bump and with no notch, not even the pill shape cut out or anything like that, because Apple has surprised us in the last few events. So there's a lot of ways this could go, but I think, the fact that we got that rumor so early from John Prosser, I guess, leak, there's just so much room for change, and every week it seems like one more part is changing and going back to what we already saw. So I'm kind of the opinion that leak that John Prosser got was not, even if it was all in good faith from whoever gave it to him, like wasn't even intentionally trying to mislead him. It was just, it was too early to really know what the next iPhone was going to be. Even though, I mean, we always talk about this, like how early do they have the next iPhone locked in? And it's usually like a year before, right? So I don't know. Who knows? I think it's very possible that the supply chain issues made them have to rethink everything and say, you know what? Let's just play it safe. We don't know what the state of the world is going to be in another 6 months, so let's just play it safe. We know we can make this. Let's just do that.
I mean, for all we know, this could have been like the Apple Watch Series 7 all over again. Not that the leak was wrong, but that this was intended to be the design of the 14, or at least the 14 Pro, and then maybe they just ran into complications when trying to produce it. Like, oh, there's just some kind of production issue, probably not worth it. We're not going to have time. Let's just scale it back. Let's still do the new notch or the hole punch thing, but we're not going to be able to do the glass back, the titanium, the round volume button, stuff like that. We don't know. And yes, it is early to get that info. And just in the past few months, we've seen so much change from the notch and other parts of the phone. We even just learning now about the processor thing. So I don't know if it's just, I wouldn't call it wrong information from John Prosser. I think that just that everything changes so much that
exactly.
What could have been the goal for the iPhone 14 back in September is just had to change for various reasons now where we stand in 2022. And now we know, like, we talked about before, Apple is working now to start mass production of these phones. It does take a lot of time to ramp up, so things are probably locked in, but maybe it's just not what we thought. Maybe they had to scale back for whatever reason. And the processor thing, I don't think you're going to notice much of a difference between A15 versus A16. I was thinking, like, maybe there is some need for the A16 on the Pro. Maybe there's some sort of, whether it's the 48 megapixel camera, that pixel binning needs more processing power. Maybe there's some new photo setting or smart HDR or higher res video. I think the Pro users and those who buy Pro phones are going to really utilize that extra power more than those with a non-Pro phone. But even with that being said, we can argue Geekbench scores all day, A15 versus A16, but really these are two excellent chips. If Apple had stuck the A14 in the 13 and they, didn't even update the processor, would anyone really complain? These chips are so good that it's just sort of, we're getting into the semantics and stuff. So
exactly. I wonder if, okay, let's just say they do this and they stick with the A15 for the regular 14. That's so confusing, but stick with the A15 for the regular iPhone 14. Do you think they would do something like what they did with the iPad and call it like the A15X or something like that? Or do you think it's got the A15? Let's not even.
I think they're just going to, they probably could maybe like change the name on it, but I think that they already have A15 Bionic. They already have the chips made. And I don't think who's going to fault them if they keep the A15 in there. They're just going to be like, oh, and the iPhone 14, it has our new, or not new, but it has the same great processor as we had and whatever. I mean, I think that Apple will find a way to sell anything. They called the iPhone SE design not old, but iconic. So there's some marketing terms in there they can use. And I'm sure they'll just, probably just A15. Or maybe they'll just mention, would they not mention it on stage? I feel like they have to mention it. I think they'll just probably just a little glossy, like, and it has the same great power as the iPhone 13 with the A15 Bionic inside, and that's where they leave it, and they spend more time on the Pro. That's what I could definitely see.
Yeah, and I mean, even if, rumors all the confusion with these rumors aside, one thing that seems pretty clear is that most of the changes are coming to the Pro models, not the regular models. So I think, yeah, the 14, they're going to get some new colors. They're going to, say, I think they would unlock that extra GPU core and say, like, it's faster for gaming real quick. They'll just mention that. And now let's talk about the Pro and the new camera and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's probably likely. But, yeah, I mean, You're right though. I mean, this phone is about to go into production, or if it hasn't already. I mean, I'm sure they're testing it at the very least. So, all these changes, either we're going to get more leaks like these CAD files, or it's going to kind of stay the same and is what it is at this point. But I don't know. As time goes on, I'm getting less and less excited about the iPhone 14. I'll say that.
This doesn't happen every year. We always get too hyped up. And it's funny. I was watching some older Everything Apple Pro videos. I was trying to find some cool renders, and it was just funny. Like all the stuff that we always thought was going to be true, like 2 years ago, that didn't, turn out to be true. Satellite connectivity. Apple was going to sell a 4G only model of, was it the iPhone 12, or just rumors. And this happens every single year. We get some really crazy rumors in the beginning, and then the closer and closer we get, the more real the phone becomes and the less exciting it is. But it just, this is the game we play following Apple rumors. It is what it is. And I guess Speaking of that, more bad news as we get closer to things and more conflicting news. So we talked MacBook Air last week, how it probably wouldn't have the M2 processor and no mini LED display. So a couple of things here. According to Ming-Chi Kuo, Apple will not release any new products this year with mini LED, that it's just too expensive, supply chain issues, whatever it is, no mini LED products. So that confirms no mini LED on the 11-inch iPad Pro, RIP, and also no mini LED on the MacBook Air, which would have been a really nice thing to have a really nice high-quality display. Not going to happen. But conflicting news here, we have Ming-Chi Kuo who says M1 MacBook Air, Mark Gurman says M2 MacBook Air. So I don't know what happened with the processor. I don't know if there's just, again, we talk about supply chain issues and logistics. Maybe the M2 just wasn't ready, so they're reshuffling things around. But as of now, there is a new MacBook Air coming, but we just don't know what the specifics are going to be. And it looks like the iPhone 14, it's a little pared down from what we originally thought it would be. Still going to have a nice design, but it will probably not have the nice higher end mini LED display. And then this also, I guess, puts in jeopardy the iMac Pro, which we can also talk about because I've seen so many hot takes on this. People are like, Apple's not going to do it.
I know.
They said they are going to do it. Ming-Chi Kuo says they will do it. Mark Gurman still says they are going to do it. So there is still a lot of hope for this thing, but it probably won't come till 2023. So,
right. Well, and then the other thing,
confusing.
I didn't read I only read the headline of that, no mini LED coming in 2022. Did that imply that there's not going to be an update to the XDR display, which we were expecting?
Great question. I think so. Well,
because I saw, some people were expecting that the studio display would also have a version that was mini LED, or maybe the iMac Pro would have a mini LED.
That's a great question because I think Ross Young, the display analyst, he said that Apple might introduce a Pro version of the studio display with mini LED, but maybe not. It's so hard. And again, I mentioned this earlier, I've never seen so many conflicting rumors from like good sources. Usually the sources are on the same page in varying degrees, but this time it's like people are like all off on their timeline. So
I know.
It seems like it's in the works rather, but it could be this year, or if Ming-Chi Kuo's right, it could be next year. And I guess I should say that Ming-Chi Kuo is not always right. Ross Young has been 100% correct as of now, but he doesn't have the track record that Kuo has. So it's always like, who do you believe? It's tough. It's nice when everybody gets on the same page, even though when that happens, it doesn't even always mean anything. But things are just so confusing this year. And I've seen so many hot takes on iMac Pro's dead and it's not dead. And
well, let's get into that. What's the hot takes? What are the hot takes on this iMac Pro? Because, we kind of mentioned it last week, whether or not we want an iMac Pro anymore, or whether or not we're seeing it now that the Mac Studio exists and presumably will have the exact same power, if not better. Or I guess the iMac Pro could have better power, but I'd presume if they do make an iMac Pro, it'll be exactly the same performance as the Mac Studio. So now that exists and there's a display, you kind of get the same package. But do they need to make an iMac Pro? I agree. There's been a lot of hot takes on this.
Do they need to? No. Are they going to? I think they will. I think that, like I said, not because I think that Apple needs to enter that market, but there has been too much info, too many leaks from too many different sources that, and again, have reaffirmed that Apple is working on this. And if Mark Gurman and both him and Ming-Chi Kuo say it's going to happen, I tend to believe it is going to happen, though it might not happen this year. But I think that there is room for a nice 27-inch mini LED display, ProMotion, all-in-one desktop. But yes, the Mac Studio is nice, but there's a nice all-in-one package Apple could sort of sell to people at maybe around the same price. Maybe you're looking at $3,000 or something in that ballpark that has the M1 Pro or M1 Max. Oh, yeah. I'm so confused on the chips now. M1 Max or M1 Ultra, and then, you'd have a nice sort of all-in-one solution. So is it the same customer, same customer as the Mac Studio? Maybe you're sort of getting in that same territory, but maybe there's enough that Apple thinks that there's a way to separate that. And it would sort of make sense in the Apple line we always talk about, because then you'd have MacBook Air, MacBook Pro, iMac Pro, Mac Mini, Mac Studio, Mac Pro. So you sort of are putting an option at every single price point and for every single level that I think it'd be nice for Apple to round it out. Is it going to be probably a big seller? Probably not, but I think it does make sense, and we probably will see it, is my guess.
Yeah, I'm conflicted too. I guess my question now is, I think a 27-inch iMac of some sort will exist, but will it just be a 27-inch iMac? And, it has the M1 option, or I guess maybe M2 at that point, depending on who you want to believe. And then maybe it only goes up to like an M1 Max at the most. And if you want the Ultra, you're going to have to get the Studio, you're going to have to get the Mac Pro. Is that possible? But then on the other hand, we're still expecting at some point a Mac Mini to come, which could be the home computer, but then you don't get the display. So yeah, that's kind of confusing. I'm kind of betting that it's not going to be an iMac Pro. It's going to be a iMac 27-inch, just because, the rumors that we've heard going back and forth, since before the Mac Studio was announced was always, is this going to look different? Is it going to have a different design? And then some people say yes, and then other people say no, it's going to look exactly the same as the 27-inch or the 24-inch iMac we have now, but it's going to be a 27-inch model, which that would lead me to believe it's just a bigger version. Plus, we've always had a smaller and a bigger version. We had the 21.5-inch and we had the 27-inch. And that's that's just how the iMac has always been. They've had two sizes, I guess not always, but since the second generation with that floaty lamp kind of base one that they had, they've always had two sizes. So, would be different not to have two sizes.
Do you think we see the naming scheme change? Because we were set on regular Pro. Do you think they call it iMac Studio? I love the Mac Studio. The name doesn't make any sense. So yeah. I don't know if it's in a class of its own, or do we see Apple sort of transition away? I don't think we see MacBook Studio, but maybe for their desktops, they have the Mac Pro, and then their other Pro-focused Macs are Mac Studio, iMac Studio. This is just a random guess. I have no idea, but I am curious to see.
I had never heard that.
See if they do change the name a little bit just to sort of match what they're doing now.
That would be interesting, and that would definitely be a way to do it. Like that would, tell the customer like this is basically an all-in-one version of the Mac Studio for those people that would want it. And I guess the initial reaction to that would be, well, why would they do that when they have the Mac Studio? That's just going to cannibalize the sales. But I guess on one hand, if they're buying either one, Apple's still, getting the profit from that. So that you can look at it that way. But also, if we look at the iPad Air, obviously they don't really care about cannibalizing sales, because the iPad Pro, I guess depending on which way you look at it, either the iPad Pro is not going to get nearly as many people to buy it, or the iPad Air is going to get way more people to buy it. And because those products are so close that's almost a similar situation to the, this iMac Studio and Mac Studio. Like they're basically the same product in a lot of ways. Apple doesn't seem to have a problem with that kind of cannibalization, especially when it's in their own product line. There's someone's still buying a Mac at that point. So what's the big deal there?
And I think too, I feel like the desktop Apple market is so much less than the laptop Apple market. I'm sure they're still selling, MacBook Pros, 7-to-1, 8-to-1 to a Mac Studio or an iMac. So I'm sure that it's such a niche market as it is. They're probably not so worried about that as well. And I'm sure their margins on it are so good that they're just like, or I've also heard the rumor that maybe we see them take the Mac or the Studio display and build a computer in there, but that's always been the dream. But if they haven't done it yet, I don't think they're going to do it, because they should have done it with the Pro Display XDR. Just put a computer in that thing and sell it. And you'd
Well,
be
you know,
set, but
I saw some people saying, because, you know, the studio display has an A13 chip built in to run the camera
Mm-hmm.
and the speaker system and everything. And if you take the specs of that, it's faster than a lot of low-end to mid-range Android phones out there. Like, it basically can be a computer, and it's running ARM, so they probably could put Mac OS on there if they wanted to. They're not going to obviously do that. But, you know, the enclosure seems, you know, ripe for it. I mean, if that A13 chip was just transferred into a M1 chip, wouldn't that be basically the same? And you can't tell me that the thermals in a Mac Studio with an M1 chip would be worse than a MacBook Air with no fans whatsoever.
Oh, exactly.
So it's got to work, right?
Exactly. I mean, that MacBook Air is so thin. This, you know, the studio display
Or
has
iPad
got some
Pro.
heft on the back. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure someone's got to do that video. I don't know how you would. So it takes someone very smart to figure out how to do that and how to get video out to feed into the monitor. And someone way smarter than us, I'm sure, is going to do it. But I can't wait to see that.
Luke Miani maybe did that once. Someone did something like that. They took an old iMac and put or maybe what was that? Quinn Snazzy Labs? Someone did
So
that.
I think a couple of people did that. Yeah, they took a Mac Mini guts and put it into an iMac, which I'd have to go back. I just don't. Well, that was the thing too with the iMac. It was easier because you could like somehow take the video out of the board and feed it in. I wonder if there's a way that I don't see. This is over my head. There's got to be a way to do it. That'd be super cool. When someone does that, there you go. There's your next hit for a YouTube video. I guess do because I don't understand.
Yeah, I guess the only question I have with this iMac is like, how does Apple position it other than, you know, it's an iMac? Like, what's the position for a higher end iMac that you can't immediately just say like, well, but we make the Mac Studio. So what do you think the position would be?
It's got to be the display is the driving force.
It's got to be better.
That
right?
say, hey, look,
Yeah.
Mac Studio is great, but if you want an all-in-one solution, here is a really powerful Mac with a 27-inch mini LED ProMotion. It's got to have that sort of creme de la creme display that you cannot get on Studio Display, or I guess you could buy separately with Studio Display Pro whenever that comes. But you're probably still gonna have a better bang for your buck if you just buy it all in one. That's how they've got it. That's the only thing that's gonna make iMac Pro worthwhile, because if it's just a regular old 27-inch mini LED, having the computer in is nice, but doesn't really make sense. It's got to be like a really nice, high quality display.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think that's the way to think about it. And I guess, you know, kind of reading through the tea leaves here, I mean, maybe some of these analysts and leakers are just misinterpreting what they're being told. Because what if, you know, they say Apple is working on a mini LED studio display, or they wouldn't say studio display, but like display, 27 inches, and it has a Apple processor inside, and it, you know, has mini LED and ProMotion. So, you know, our assumption would be, okay, well, it's going to be just like the studio display, but with, you know, it's going to be the Pro version of that. But that very easily can be interpreted as being an iMac. It's just the Apple Silicon, instead of being like an A13, is an M2 or something like that, right? Like,
you know what's
the interpretation could just be off here.
You know what's funny too is that I feel like we heard about the displays. When were those rumors popping off? It was like a couple months ago.
Yeah.
What's funny is that Apple really developed those displays. I don't know how long it took, but they did it pretty fast, and it almost didn't leak. I mean, I just remember we had heard a couple months ago about Apple developing a display with an Apple Silicon chip inside, and no one knew what it was going to be, and it's pretty good on Apple's part. So kudos to them for that. But I was thinking that same thing is maybe, you know, were all those Mac Mini rumors about Mac Studio all along? Were all the iMac Pro rumors just about a 27-inch mini LED display? It's very confusing, which sort of makes you think, you know, with iPhone 14, was that
right?
Well, iPhone's always a little different though too, because the Mac thing could mean a couple of different things. Usually with iPhone, it's usually just like one or two models. So it's so confusing.
Yeah, but the more I think about it, the more I like look back at what was announced and what we actually like thought was going to be announced. I mean, every event, something has been wrong.
No, I want to go back. We should do this one episode. Let's go back 2 or 3 years to some videos and Mac rumors and like look at like just the rumors of what they say is going to happen. Because I watched like 2 minutes of the Everything Apple Pro video, and there was already like 5 things that never came to fruition, like what it was going to be. And even last year there was the satellite stuff, which they're still, I guess, rumored to be working on now. We're going to get that new color. We were going to get Touch ID, which I still don't understand what happened there. Just it's like part of playing the game with the rumors is just know that it's probably not gonna say it's probably not gonna happen, but take it with a major grain of salt, because it might or might not happen until we're like, okay, we're a month away from September. That's when things are usually locked in. But now, even, you know, as we sit now in the spring of 2022, pre-summer, it's like the Wild West. Things are kind of crazy, and as we get closer to summer, that's when things will sort of get more finalized and locked in.
Yeah, it's just, we got to do that. We got to look back and see what was right and what was wrong, because at the very least, the last few events have been up in the air. We don't really know exactly what to expect. Even if we think we know, there's always some kind of wild card in there. Another thing that happened this week was updates to our software. So Mac OS got an update, iPad OS got an update, iPhone OS got an update. I have yet to update my iPhone, but that has the mask support for Face ID, so you can just not worry about it, and you don't even need an Apple Watch anymore. Have you updated to that? I haven't even.
I did. That was the only update I actually did. And what was interesting is that I had to go back and redo the Face ID setup from scratch, and it was way more finicky this time. Face ID has always been like a very easy setup for me. I hold it there, it does its thing, and it's like 20 seconds. This time it took a lot more, like position it there, position it lower, get it closer, get it further away. Maybe they're just doing a better job of training that trued up system, but this was the first time I did it, and it had me have one take with my glasses on, one take with my glasses off. So for whatever it's worth, I did do that, but I did not update the Mac. I didn't do the iPad, which I know gives you universal control, but I've had so many bad issues with Mac OS updates that I'm a little wary on that, so we'll see what happens. But I did, speaking of universal control, I finally got rid of the Keychron keyboard and my Logitech MX Master 2 because I was tired of both of them. I love the mouse, but it was old and dirty and gross, and I'd had it for like 3 years, and it was like not holding a charge, and it was busted. And I love the Keychron. Let me pull it out here for show and tell. I love the Keychron keyboard, but wrong drawer. Hold on. But I found that not only is the battery not good on this as well, or it gets worse after time, but I love the mechanical keyboard, but after time, like, it hurt to type. Like, after a long day of typing, like 8 hours of typing things, like, my fingers just hurt. Like, it was just too much pressure on my hands to get up there and type, which sort of irritated me. So, RIP Keychron.
I find it's not the keyboard itself that hurts. It's that it's so high off the ground. That's what I found it is.
And even at its lowest position here without the little feet kicked out. And also I will mention that like the little tabs came off. I like Keychron stuff, but they don't hold up super well. I will, to my credit, to my detriment, the first one I spilled coffee on, so I reordered it. So this is my second one. I like it a lot. It's still a good keyboard, but it just gotta hurt after a while. So I did swap it. But before I reveal what I got, Matt, what keyboard and mouse are you using these days? Because I know you've swapped between a different one, and I'm just curious what you're using now.
So show and tell here, I'm using the Apple keyboard. I'm actually going to update pretty soon to the latest version of this because I want Touch ID now that I have the M1 MacBook Pro. So that's just the Apple keyboard for now, and I have the MX Master 3. Although I didn't really look into it because I already have it, but I saw that there's like a new Mac version of the mouse, which some people complain about Bluetooth issues and stuff. I've never had that problem, but maybe that'll fix it. But yeah, MX Master 3 and the Apple keyboard.
I do have the Apple keyboard, which I do. It's like my backup keyboard. I like it, but like I'm not used to the spacing anymore because I was used to that Keychron. I will say for the mouse, yes, I did the 3 because this is the best mouse ever. I mean, if you haven't had a Logitech mouse, they make an excellent mouse. The 3 is also, well, first off, what was driving me nuts about the 2 was that it had micro USB. So every time I charged it was such a pain. And I was always like, every time I pulled out that cable, I was like, I need to get a new mouse. This is old. It's worth $100 because I use it. It's like $100 is a lot for a mouse, but if you're on the computer 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, whatever it is, it's worth it. So I did do that, and like just the build quality is better on this. I used the side scroll wheel all the time in Final Cut, so that was nice. The buttons, the programmability, that was cool. And for the keyboard, I actually didn't do any research. I just saw a couple of tweets on it. I was like, I'm gonna try it. I went with the Logitech MX Master or MX Keys. This is their Mac version of the keyboard. It's got these little kind of circular indentations, so it's easier to type on. And I did no research on it. I just bought it, and I gotta say I really like it. It's, again, Logitech makes good stuff, so the build quality is really good. I have had no connection issues, but it's comfortable. You can program all the keys with the Logitech software if you want to get in there and dive into some of the settings. But and I also wanted the 10 key because I was kind of sick and tired of entering numbers just with the 10 key listing and having to go on top. So I wanted something with a number pad on there. So anyways, my little tangent for the week. Curious what keyboard you guys are using, but I will say I've had this for a couple of days, and I really like the MX keys, and it's backlit, and it's got a Mac version, which
Logitech makes some great stuff. I have their K780, which I don't know if they sell anymore, but it's like it's a desktop keyboard that has a little stand, so you can prop up your phone in front of it. It's nice, and it's circular keys with that little indentation, which is really nice. I also saw I'm trying to find it on their let me see if I can find it real quick. Keyboards. They came out with their own version of a mechanical keyboard, kind of like the K2 from Keychron, but it's a Logitech one, so it has those circular keys with the indentations, but it's mechanical, which I don't think they've ever made a mechanical. Why can't I I'm trying to filter on their website. I can't filter by. It's like mouse and keyboard, but not just keyboard. Oh, maybe I'm looking wrong. Hold on. I gotta find this, but yeah, no, that I'm in the market for a new keyboard. I'm tempted to go with just the newer version of the Apple keyboard because of Touch ID, but I'm also so used to not using Touch ID at this point that there's a few mechanical keyboards I want to check out, and some of those Logitech ones looks nice as well. So I'll probably get one of those. I can't find this keyboard, but I saw it on Instagram or something.
It's just I saw a couple of videos on it. I think they were like Logitech sponsorships.
Found it. It's called the Pop Keys.
Oh, there you go, Pop Keys. Not sponsored at all. Logitech, hit us up. Love your stuff, but I paid for this. But I was just like on Amazon. I'm like, oh, they like got a little like bundle deal of like the mouse and the keyboard. I'm like, well, I need a new mouse. I'll try the keyboard, and I really like it. So if you're looking for a good, and I will say, important note here, get a Mac key mapped keyboard. Don't do the Windows one because it's all screwed up. They make a nice Mac version with the command and option keys and control and everything, and it's worth checking out. So that is my product recommendation for the show and my tangent for the show. So
yeah, and speaking of, that kind of transitions into one of the most anticipated features with the software updates for the Mac and for the iPad, which is universal control. You haven't used it yet, right? You said you haven't updated.
I have not, and you know what? I don't know. My main use case would be to use my MacBook Pro and this iMac back here, because that's what I use the third-party software Synergy to share the keyboard and mouse with one computer to the next. But as great as it sounds, I don't think this Mac supports the latest version of. Well, I think it only works with M1 Mac, so it doesn't even matter what the software is. It's not an M1 Mac, so I'm out of luck there. So I have not had the need to update as fast as I should have. But have you tried it, Matt? Have you tried it, and do you know how well it works, and can you give us a rundown?
Yeah, so it's still in beta, so there are definitely some issues with it, which I'll talk about in a second, but I got it installed last night. I've been playing around with it pretty much all day, and it works really well. I connected it to my iPad Pro and to my iPad Mini. I didn't do it at the same time, but I got to try that because you can do the 3 support. But basically, I have my display up top, and I have my iPad Mini on the bottom, and you just kind of drag your mouse down and it automatically switches to the iPad, and you just now use your iPad as an iPad but with the mouse and keyboard support instead of using the, what is it called when you extend the display? Blanking on the name of what they call that. Sidecar. Instead of using Sidecar, which is just an extension of your Mac's display, this is just the iPad interface itself, and it works well. Now, it is still in beta, like I said, and I think that's where I'm having the issues because like we just said, I'm using the MX Master 3, and when I go into the iPad, I can scroll around, I can click, everything works there. Or sorry, I can't scroll around. I meant I can move around and click and do everything, but scrolling does not work for some reason on this mouse. Now, Ralph, our coworker who messes around with all this kind of stuff too, I asked him, he's been trying it too. He was using the Apple trackpad and that worked fine. So I'm assuming it's just a third-party issue. Hopefully they fix that pretty soon, at least in the next update or something like that. The other issue that I had real quick is that the keyboard shortcuts, even though this is an Apple keyboard shortcuts on the iPad didn't work, so I couldn't like go home or go to Spotlight or anything like that.
It's interesting you see that about the scrolling. Have you had scrolling issues on macOS Monterey just in general?
No, not really, no.
Because I have had issues with my Logitech mouse, and it's a common issue apparently a lot of people have, that the scrolling just stops working. So you'll like be using the mouse fine and the scrolling just stops, and you either have to turn the mouse on and turn it back on, and usually like that might get it to work, or you got to do a whole reboot of the machine to get it working just for scrolling. I've heard it happen with mostly third-party mice, but also with the Apple stuff too, so I'm not sure if it's all connected, but I've had that issue recently. It's been driving me nuts. I have to do a whole reboot, but the scrolling just like for whatever reason on macOS Monterey just doesn't want to work.
Yeah, that seems to be an issue with Logitech particularly. Like they always have issues on the Mac for some reason. I don't get it. Like that's one of the things everyone complains about with these Logitech mice, even though they're still like the best option. But people just seem to have issues with them. I guess one way to solve that, at least in the past, I haven't tried it lately on these new Macs, but like one way people have solved that is using the what do you call that? The little USB key that you stick in
unifying receiver,
Yeah.
or whatever. Yeah.
So instead of using, I guess, is it still using Bluetooth or is it what is it using at that point? Either way, it's going over USB instead of
I think
Bluetooth.
it's like a low band, like kind of like 2 gigahertz kind of thing.
RF.
I don't, no idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. So either way, it's not connected to your Bluetooth on your Mac, so it's a little bit more reliable. I haven't tried that on these new ones because I haven't really had any issues. The other thing, like that, just seems to be an issue with Macs. I think it's better in this new one, but I know you've had these issues. I've had these issues. Is that the Bluetooth just gets overloaded quickly? Have you had that? Do you remember like sometimes your computer would just like stop working? And like,
I had that a lot.
It's clearly a Bluetooth issue.
With the Intel MacBook Pro, it's been a lot better on this M1. I feel like M1, man, it's so confusing now with the chips. M1 Max has solved a lot of problems, and I have not had that issue nearly as bad as I did on my Intel machine. But yeah, on my Intel machine, it was so bad where like, if you had like 2 or 3 Bluetooth devices connected, like a keyboard, a mouse, and something else, like it would just get overloaded where like you couldn't scroll, you couldn't move the mouse, audio wouldn't work. It was like the Bluetooth. Maybe they like updated the firmware or like the chip or like there's better bandwidth in there, but it was like getting to the point where it seemed overloaded and things would just like stop or like stutter. That has not been an issue for me on this new computer though. Have you had the issue?
No, I haven't noticed it. I also didn't really notice it as much on the 16-inch MacBook Pro from Intel, with Intel, I should say. So I think it's just the newer versions of Bluetooth are better. But either way, connecting to your Mac wirelessly always just seems to be some kind of issue. Like it never just works perfectly like it does on the iPhone or the iPad. Like if you connect to the iPad or the iPhone with Bluetooth, it just works. I don't understand what the difference is. Maybe it's like a proximity thing because my computer's a little further away, but that can't be it. I don't know. It's weird. But yeah, universal control, I'm really liking it. The question I really have is what am I going to use it for? Because right now I haven't used it as much as I wanted to, except for testing, but just because of that scrolling issue, like that basically makes it useless for me. Plus not being able to use keyboard shortcuts. I can't just like go home on the iPad. I have to pick up my hand and then swipe home, which is like that defeats the whole purpose. Obviously that'll be fixed and ironed out. They clearly say when you turn it on that this is beta. But this is also another, this may not actually be a beta issue. This is just an issue overall. The battery life on your device, your iPad or whatever you're controlling, it gets destroyed. Like to the point where you can almost watch it going down. So for instance, in 5 minutes, it probably goes down 3% on my iPad mini, like that bad. So you have to have it plugged in. Obviously that would solve the issue if you just plug it in, but yeah, that is an issue. I don't even think that would be a beta problem. That's just, something going on. Like it's always communicating. There are a few options that you can toggle to hopefully eliminate that. Like I have it set to just always detect if the iPad is there. So, obviously if I turn that off, it'll probably be a little better because it's not always searching for it. And you can do that kind of thing. But then at that point, it's like, well, that defeats the purpose because I want it to just work. If I have to go in every time and turn it on, that's kind of annoying. So, very early days of this feature, but it does work. It works pretty much as advertised, and it's very fast and very smooth. I'm just hoping we get these iterations quicker and faster rather than slower. And also, I would love a third party, now that I've just used it a little bit, I'd love a third party to create a little extension that, in the menu bar or something, you tap one button and then it searches for your iPad. That way I can turn that feature off and I don't have to go into system preferences every time. I can just like click a button. But yeah, that's pretty much it. It's a nice feature. We'll see how much I actually use it though, because I don't know. It's one of those things that sounds awesome and then 2 weeks later you forget about.
It's like every like new feature. It's like I've yet to use SharePlay at all. What are the other big iOS 16
Well, actually,
features?
I tried to use SharePlay, and then the app that I wanted to use it with, it didn't work. So it's like that's what always seems to happen.
I totally forgot that now you can. Is it iOS 16? You can now share your screen in FaceTime.
iOS 16, you're getting ahead of us.
Oh, I'm living in the future here. iOS 15. I totally forgot that was a thing until like the other day when I was on a FaceTime call. I realized that you could share your screen. Totally forgot that existed. I feel like maybe we're just too in tune with this. Like we are so early on this stuff in June that by the time it rolls out in the fall, we just forget.
I think that's a big part of it. Yeah.
But I feel like just it's like there's always like these new features that talk about the stuff, and then it like rolls out, and I just totally forget that it's there. Sometimes I do use like the iCloud like hide my email kind of thing. I've never used Private Relay just because I've heard of too many issues.
I have it turned on, but I don't even
trying to use that.
Yeah.
But which sort of now gets me thinking about WWDC and where do we go from here? So we had this spring event, nothing on the books for the foreseeable future until presumably June. What do the next few months look like in the Apple world? Are we back to the tech drought, or do you think we see press release updates or news, or what do you think what is the next big Apple thing? Is it in June with WWDC?
I mean, if history tells us anything, then yes, that is the case. But we still have that one interesting comment from Mark Gurman where he said an event in the summer. And Mark Gurman is in the know enough that if it was WWDC, he would say WWDC. So that's the only reason why I think we might see something coming up. Also, there's a lot of other products that are worth talking about. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to get too hopeful. I'm just going to assume WWDC, but yeah.
If you think about it, let's say they have iPad Pros, when do those launch? Because you could do it in the spring, which would make sense. WWDC, I guess, but that might be busy. Then the fall is all iPhones and maybe any last minute Mac stuff. So it makes sense to me. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I could see a May event that is MacBook Air, iPad Pro, and what's another one that's probably done? I heard maybe Mac Mini. Don't know how exciting that is. What else could they do?
Well, I guess, if they just, because things seem to be in a little bit of flux right now. So if they just make the decision, geez, for all the video watchers, the sun is like directly in my face. Can't really do anything about it. Sorry about that, but I'm getting blinded. If they just make the decision, I feel like they've almost been hopeful that, okay, we're going to get the M2 out. We're going to get it. We're going to get it going. So let's push everything to the fall because it's going to get going. But if they, maybe they realize this is just not going to happen. Let's just ship with the M1 and we'll, save it for next year. Then maybe they just say, okay, we're just going to announce everything that we were waiting for the M2 and we're just going to announce that earlier. Because if they just decide, if that was the issue and they just decide we're not going to worry about it, we're just going to use the M1, then they could just announce it now pretty much, right? Like they would need just to retool it a tiny bit and make sure everything works, and then you're good to go. So I could see them, releasing the MacBook Air even, or the Mac Mini at a sooner event. I wouldn't say a April event or anything like that. Not that soon, but summer event could be interesting. But I guess another question is, they specifically said the Mac Pro is the last one that is going to be switched over to Apple Silicon, which they never really mentioned that new products are ever coming, even though we all know that's happening, but they never really mentioned that. So do you think that's something we're going to see in WWDC, or do you think we're going to see that in the fall?
Oh, I think it's got to be WWDC unless they do a 2-event thing in the fall where they do iPhones, AirPods, and then maybe we get like another Mac event like at the end of the year with like MacBook Air and Mac Pro and something else. I don't know. I think that WWDC is the best shot we have, and if it's not there, then it's anybody's best guess on when we could see it. It's interesting too because now Mark Gurman is saying in his latest Power On newsletter, he's like, here's what the Macs are going to look like when the transition wraps up in 2023 or the end of 2023, which I thought that it was supposed to wrap up by the end of this year, but maybe there's some lingering stuff, or it seems like the timeline might have got pushed out a little bit, so I wouldn't be surprised if maybe this is delayed until early next year. But the fact that Apple mentioned it leads me to believe there at least is going to be some kind of sneak peek of this. Right. But if you believe Gurman, he says this will be powered off of M2, so it's not really just sort of contingent on when we see M2. Whenever we get the first M2 device, that's when sort of the cards fall, and that's when this other stuff should sort of fall into place. But right now, with no M2, we just don't know what the timeline looks like.
Yeah, and the M2 comment kind of makes sense because if you remember when they announced the M1 Ultra, they specifically said this is the last M1 chip in the line, which is kind of interesting if they're going to not, if that was a lie. They wouldn't lie. Why would they lie about that? They just wouldn't need to say anything, right? So it makes sense that the M2 would then have this M1 or M2 Extreme for the Mac Pro. which was that an actual rumor? I just heard someone throw that name, and I can't remember where I heard it from. or M2 Extreme.
That's from Mark Gurman himself.
Okay.
So
right. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me because from Apple's own mouth, it makes sense because they said the Ultra is the last chip in the line for the M1, and the Max Pro still needs to get the update. So that makes sense to me. It's just all about timing at this point, right? So if it is delayed, then yeah, it's going to be next year.
I just don't know. It's like so exciting and also so confusing because I just don't know how this plays out. And now, was it Mark Gurman who also said that now the headset probably not coming this year, probably 2023.
At this point, I don't expect the headset ever.
And that too. I also feel like maybe let's give Apple the benefit of the doubt. This was the plan to do headset and some other stuff, but supply chain issues were so bad.
Yeah, definitely.
Even for Apple, who I guess they usually are able to kind of skate by this okay, but it seems like they themselves are even running into issues that maybe there was just some issue with just getting it out. So
I definitely think that's the issue. Yeah.
I would love to see a preview of this at WWDC or something, but now it's like I just after this last event and things changed so much, I will reserve judgment until 24 hours before the event because that's when things really seem to take shape.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, what I completely agree with you. I think supply chain is the issue here. It's not that the products aren't ready. I think maybe the products aren't ready, but it's because of supply chain. Like they were on track to do it, and then things just didn't work out. But I guess the question is, they could, at least for the headset especially, they could still show us what it is, right? Because they have devices. They're just not mass produced at this point. So like they could show us what it is, and maybe it doesn't come out for a year. They've done that before, or at least close to that. So I could still see that happening, maybe, but I don't know. Maybe Apple doesn't want to have another air power fiasco where it takes them like 6 years and it never actually comes out.
Not only that, though, but they probably should preview this thing in some sense and give us a good, thorough explanation because it's going to need some time to be explained. So I think it makes sense to get a little preview, at least of the software. See, I don't know how they're going to do it. I think definitely a preview makes sense. Here's the device, here's the software, here's how it works, and it's coming sometime next year. Who's going to complain about that? Because at least we know it exists. We know it's real. There's going to be issues for Apple to iron out and production stuff. But I do think that we could at least see a preview of how it's going to work because there's so much new here, or at least rumored to be new, that it's going to take a decent chunk of time to explain. Here's how it works. Here's how you navigate. It's almost like the Apple Watch, the iPad, or the iPhone. Right. It's like kind of introducing us to a whole new project or product, or I guess kind of both.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we could still very well see it, whether or not we are able to buy it this year. That was already up in the air. So I think, 2023 at the earliest makes sense. But I still hope that we do see it. But yeah, everything's kind of in limbo. We don't really know what's going to happen. And as these rumors come out, it just gets more and more confusing. So yeah, we'll see what's happening. Anything else that we didn't mention that's worth talking about?
The last thing we can touch on briefly, again, Ming-Chi Kuo and Mark Gurman coming in hot this week. Kuo says that the Apple Car project has been dissolved, or the team, rather, has been dissolved for some time, and that they need to pull it together if they're still aiming to produce a car or mass produce a car by 2025. Now, I don't know if he said that. He said it was dissolved. I don't know if he said they're trying to pull it together to hit 2025 or what's going to happen, but it sounds like we had heard a lot of issues with Apple Car, and it sounds like as of right now, the project is like on hold again. Because I think it was like on hold indefinitely before, then it was unpaused, and now it seems like I don't see how. I don't know where Apple is in this process, but I don't know how in 2022, in the spring of 2022, if the team is not together now, how they're going to rally and get this thing mass produced in less than 3 years. That makes zero sense to me. So I am now more in the camp now that Apple Car probably isn't coming. Or at least not in the form we thought. Right,
exactly. I think it makes more sense that they could just work on the software and double down on like what CarPlay is and what that means and what they could provide to OEMs of other cars. That makes more sense. It seems like less headache, especially in today's world. Like we just saw yesterday, Tesla raised their prices by like $5,000 across the board. Like, obviously, within 5 years or by 2025 at least, you would hope that all of this would kind of calm down. But at this rate, like who knows? It could just get worse and worse. So entering a space like this for Apple maybe does not seem like the best idea. Maybe they see that and they're like, it's not even worth it at this point.
That totally makes sense to me. It'll be interesting to see how things shake out. But yeah, maybe Apple's just better off not trying to get involved in car projects, especially now when things are expensive, complicated, and a lot of competition for them too, which I'm sure Apple could do great things, but do they really need to get into the car space? Let's get the headset out the door first.
Exactly.
Then let's start with the car rumors. So, Matt, I think that's it. Never a time I've remembered more than right now with so much conflicting news, and we don't know what Apple's going to do, but hopefully more will become clear, and we will obviously tread through this uncharted territory together with you guys and hopefully give you some guidance from our years of expertise. Hopefully we can shed some light to you guys on what you should do, what you shouldn't do, and hopefully provide some insight. As always, though, we want to hear from you guys. If you guys have questions, you have comments, you want to know what you should buy, what you shouldn't buy, should you wait for the iPhone 14, should you upgrade from your 12 to the 13, let us know your thoughts on all this stuff down below if you're watching on YouTube, or you could text us. The number is 949-354-3508. Let us know, and we will get to you guys in your comments and next week's episode. So always, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you right back here, same time, same place, for another episode of the Apple Circle Podcast.